Hey there, guys. You're listening to Yakkin with Nick. I am your host, and I have an interview for you today with MK Lords, who you're probably familiar with, and I will we'll get into it as the interview starts. But I wanted to say that there were just a couple dropouts, Skype things, where I think it was only happened to MK just a couple times, where didn't really hear what she said, but I think it's still, her general point was made, so I didn't really mess with those. And then I have the worst audio. I think it's because I'm just not very conscious about how far away from the mic I am. I don't know if you noticed there, but I got closer to the mic because I realized it was too far away. So I think that I'm quiet here, and in the last, I think with Michael it was fine because he recorded and he messed with levels on his end. But the one with Jeremy, of course, that had some audio issues. So anyway, guys, I'm working on it, and we'll see if it can be fixed in the future. I think it's just I need to be closer to my microphone, and I need to be better about that. So with that, here is my show with MK Lords. Because I've been thinking a lot about how my perspective has changed on, I guess particularly like the feminist um, topic of issues concerning women. um, my view has changed a lot because I come from a spot like a place where I'm very insulated. I think, and I've been lucky to be around I think a decent number of decent people, and I haven't been put into many situations where I feel like a lot of like where a lot of these bad cultural norms take place, like um, misogyny and sexual harassment. I have not been privy to that, and so that's kind of made me less what's the word? I guess not trustworthy, but just more skeptical of these claims that there really are issues concerning women that are unique to women in this society. I've come a long way because I come from that spot of I just didn't know because I'm a single cisgendered male, upper raised in the upper middle class in a rural area. Catcalling doesn't happen on logging roads. You know, it just doesn't. So
Yeah.
it's been very interesting for me over particularly the last 2 years, to kind of um, bring these ideas of like, oh wait, okay, it does make sense that in this is the same thing with kind of racist um, issues too, is that people do have different experiences than me. Mine is not the baseline, and I live a pretty good life compared to a lot of people. And it's I don't know. It took a long time, I think, at first to kind of get over the idea of, oh, I am privileged because of my skin tone and my gender, or because of where I was born. But I wanted to talk to you about that because I think you have been kind of I would say the main place of where these ideas have come into my mind because, MK Lords is somebody I've been aware of for a long time. I don't know when we met. It
Oh
must have been
man,
through the
it's been
Freedom
years
Fiends.
now. I think it was through Freedom Fiends for sure.
Yeah, and I think that the kind of the anarchist feminist philosophy really I knew kind of these things existed and I knew some people I think, but you started talking about those ideas on the Fiends and I had that that influence and in this particularly I think where I've changed a lot of my mind and where I went on a different track maybe was these like the discussions in the School Sucks Project group about um, cultural issues. And I think that's particularly where I was like, okay, all right, I'm with MK on these things. Like I kind of decided, okay, no, because there's a lot of people. You are a controversial figure among the small, libertarian circles. I don't know how small. I guess they're fairly large, but um, you know, the, a lot of libertarian media producers um, that you and I know, right, don't like you that much because of what you have to say. And I was, I've always been skeptical, but yeah, recently I've just been okay. No, the stuff that she's saying about feminism, I'm buying it. The gender norms, I'm buying it now. So anyway, I'll let you talk, but that's really why I wanted to talk to you, and that's what I've been thinking about today is, what could I talk to about with MK? And I wanted to kind of talk about, um, since you're a woman and you've had some experiences that are unique to you and not myself, I wanted to have you on and to talk about kind of I guess that topic in a broad way, and we'll see what we can do. But first, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself for the audience, most people probably know you. I've had you on the Anarcho-Yakidalism podcast, I think a couple of times, and people are probably familiar with your work if you're familiar with the Freedom Fiends and stuff like that. But yeah, if you wouldn't mind, who is MK Lords?
Oh man, that's a whole thing. Okay. But yeah, so what I'm doing now, I'm probably known for my work on Freedom Fiends, and I've been associated with libertarian stuff for a while. I don't use that label to describe my beliefs anymore because as I've gotten older, I think libertarianism is not a bad philosophy by any means, but I think it's very limited in its worldview and its scope of the social side of the problems that people face. And I mostly keep a lot of my criticisms more located on the United States because that's the experience I have, and I really don't think that I can speak for what happens in other countries and other parts of the world. But more broadly speaking, I have been more outspoken about feminism and things like that. And yes, it has made me, I guess I'm known as controversial. I seem to make a lot of people angry, and it's because a lot of this stuff is very close to my experience, being gendered as a woman my whole life. You find out very early on that you are treated differently from other people. And we can get into that in a little bit. But what I'm doing now is I am podcasting and writing, and I'm doing freelancing. I'm currently a digital nomad. So I don't have a specific home base. I'm staying at a friend's house now until kind of the middle of December, and then I'm hitting the road, and I'll be on a long road trip across the country. I'll be collecting stories from people and doing interviews. I run the podcast Iconosass, which focuses on a whole broad range of issues. I've kind of shifted the format to be more of an interview show because I really like collecting people's stories and finding out more about them and kind of the interesting lives that they've led. And it is going to be somewhat outspoken and radical too when I do the shows kind of on my own. I come from a place of, I guess you could call it radical queerness. So I am that pansexual, polyamorous, genderqueer faggot that everyone's so afraid of. And
Sorry for the bird.
That's okay. And I do a lot of writing and stuff too. I do poetry, I do stories, I do essays. That's all on my Patreon page. I've kind of made that a hub for all of my creative work. I also do different types of dancing and some comedy stuff. And, I've been lucky to have a lot of experience doing a lot of different types of jobs and careers and stuff like that. And it's allowed me to, I think, have a kind of very nuanced view of people and human interaction and social issues and all of that. My experience has been colored by the gender that I was assigned at birth, which is female. But I would say that I more closely identify as a non-binary person. And I know this may be getting into, this is like weird gender territory. Okay. Like, I'm sure a lot of your listeners might be rolling their eyes at this point. It's like, oh my God, like special snowflake, SJW. Feminazi, which, by the way, I do find it ironic that I've been called a feminazi for years, while there are now like literal Nazis marching in the street. And I'm sorry, I don't remember where feminism ever genocided 6 million Jews. I'm gonna need a citation for that. But but yeah, so when growing up as a woman, I always felt out of touch with other people who were the same gender as me. But also, boys. So I'd say I was a tomboy growing up. I had a lot of what people would say are kind of masculine interests, even though I don't really even agree with that term. Like, why is playing with cars and doing science projects seen as masculine? That's a whole thing to deconstruct on its own. And what is a woman? To say you are assigned being a woman at birth, that comes with all this baggage that I didn't really ask for, and that I didn't want to be seen as that. I would have rather been seen as gender neutral my whole life. And you find out that what gender neutral actually means is the experience of usually a straight, white, upper middle class male. You were treated different. Like, that's seen as the default. And I don't mean it as a kind of, I'm not trying to be like, oh, check your privilege or anything like that. I mean, that is kind of the default perspective through which we view a lot of entertainment and a lot of advertising and a lot of social customs and things like that. And if you deviate far from that, you find that things don't speak to you in the same kind of way. And I found this out. People might be like, well, what do you know what you're talking? How do you know about this? What, when you're talking about, you don't know what it's like to be like a straight white man or anything like that. And I only do through kind of interactions on the internet. So I've written under a gender neutral pen name for a long time now. And before I attached an avatar to it, I would get totally different responses to my writing. And most people assumed that I was a male writer. So people would speak to me in entirely different ways. And as soon as they found out that, I was a woman or appeared to be a woman or presented as a woman or whatever, then the tone would entirely change. I would find myself being condescended to. I would find myself listening to just very long explanations of things from men who assumed that I didn't know what I was talking about because I was a woman, even if it was on topics that I knew vastly more about them, specifically feminism. I can't tell you how many times I've had feminism mansplained to me as if it's some kind of socialist agenda, when we don't do that with other types of philosophy. For example, libertarianism or anarchism are very huge schools of philosophical thought. You have, for example, if you break down the economic schools of libertarianism, you have the Austrian school and the Chicago school, and they are very different, but they are still classified under the umbrella of, libertarian, like, economic systems. Feminism has never really been given a very fair shake from conservatives and libertarians in that regard. So even though you have several different waves of feminism and several different schools of feminism, some of which are completely opposed to each other. For example, in second wave feminism, you had anti-sex or sex-negative feminists and sex-positive feminists. And they were very much at odds because one of them viewed pornography and sex work as oppressive to women, and then the other side kind of viewed it as liberating. And there were shades in between that too. If you even go back to first wave feminism and you have your suffragist movements, and that's what people mostly think of when they think of as feminism, you had a lot of people who were fighting for voting rights for women. But then you had radical feminists like Emma Goldman and Valterine de Cleyre who didn't want anything to do with the state. They were anarcha-feminists. And then you even had people all in between that. So to say that feminism is cultural Marxism or to say that it's some kind of government agenda to break up the traditional family and turn women into lesbians and stuff like that is extremely reductive and very uncharitable. And so I'm pretty outspoken about it because, again, I've had a lot of direct experience in this field, considering I've been treated like a woman my entire life. And I've also read a lot of books on it, and I've read a lot of opposing viewpoints on it. And I've read a lot of anti-feminist stuff, too. I actually spent a lot of time trying to understand the men's rights movement and men's rights advocates and things like that. And I think a lot of people just assume that I've never really looked into that. But I've read a lot. I've tried to give a lot of philosophies that I strongly disagree with a fair approach in understanding them.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot that you said. I guess I agree with your observations that libertarians and conservatives don't really pay much. Well, if they pay any mind, it's a dismissive. No, I don't really want to listen to what you women have to say, right? That's typically what I have found with the introduction to feminism for many libertarians and people in my own circle, and I think that was probably myself. When I first heard of it, I was like, well, these feminists want to destroy the idea of gender and take over the world and become the matriarchy. That was probably my first thought, and I think that's probably a lot of people's thought. But I do. This is something like everybody, I think, makes this mistake about their opposing view side, is that it's much more simple than you think, or than they say, when it's actually much more complex than you think. And that's I think typical, right? Like you said, there's many different schools of anarchism, and any anarchist will recognize that. Oh yeah, there's communists. I'm not an anarcho-communist, of course not. But if you would say that you're not a certain kind of feminist, I'm another one. It's like, wow, you guys are all the same. That's very hypocritical, and it's disappointing that people who value something like individual freedom, and I think most people typically aren't born into the ideas of anarcho-capitalism. You typically find yourself there. It's disappointing that so many people who are I think generally pretty smart, they get some ideas at least. Maybe they aren't geniuses, and maybe they aren't the most socially adept people, but people who do spend a lot of time thinking, it's disappointing that they can miss some pretty big breaches in their own thought, or they're not considering something that is important. And I think that these, I think that especially anarcho-capitalists like to focus on economics, and things like gender norms aren't really considered. But I think that I think one thing that I've changed in my outlook on kind of what's important, like there's a few things we can focus on, like policy or economics, creating the best system. But I think what's really important is kind of the existence of being, kind of the experience of being, I guess. That's what's important to me. It's like, what is the experience of different people around this world, and how can we make it better? That's what I'm interested in, and I think that a key step in recognize, how do we make the experience better for everybody, is to understand the experience of living as a human being, not just from your own perspective, but from all as many as you can, as many perspectives at least as you can try. So I think that's really important, and I'm glad that there are people like you bringing stuff up like that.
Thank you. Well, there is no economic freedom without social freedom, because economics is human action, right? And if we want free markets, if we want a world where we have, informed actors making decisions and the market is supposed to be finding the best, most efficient way of doing things, as long as you have a patriarchal system that's influenced by patriarchal cultural norms, then you're not ever going to have a truly free market. And this is something that I think a lot of people completely miss. They will sit there and say, well, yes, the market is human action and the market is people making informed choices and stuff like that. If your choices are informed with wrong information, you're going to be having a market that's sending off wrong signals, basically. And I think markets are a lot there. I think people are completely irrational. I don't think there's any kind of rational actors. I think things are very hard to systematize and control in any kind of way. That's why I don't think the state is an effective way of dealing with anything. And I said on, one of my more recent podcasts that I'm more of a descriptive anarchist. I think we already exist in a lot of chaos, and I don't have a solution to it, but I do know that if people are saying they believe in free markets, then you cannot have free markets when there are very repressive social norms. And right now we are living in a society all over the world, but, also in the United States, of patriarchal domination. And the word patriarchy gets kind of a visceral reaction from people. But all it means is rule by men. It means that men are in the dominant ruling classes of people. And this is just statistically true. This is not really a matter of debate at all. If you look at the breakdown of the United States government, for example, and the corporate governance beyond that, and the crony capitalist system that we have, you have 90+% of CEOs are male, older, white males. Same with Congress, House, Senate, every single part of government is ruled by older white men. And so to say that society is in any way this like leftist paradise of matriarchal structures, I think is just not really living in reality, because government, through the use of force, is going to enforce its cultural norms on other people. And that's what we're seeing right now. And when people say that, oh, feminists are trying to destroy the traditional family and they're trying to bring about Marxism, I think it's really missing the forest for the trees. That's like worrying about ISIS, for example, while ignoring the entire imperialist apparatus of the United States government who's policing the world. And that, to me, is the difference between feminism and patriarchy. Patriarchy is this massive system. It's systematized sexism. And it's in pretty much all of our lives, in more overt ways and in also very subtle ways. And so to say, wait a second, look over here at these people who have a much smaller percentage. I mean, if you really do the breakdowns of, how many people percentages wise identify as feminists in this country, it's not even 20%. It's become such a bad, scary word. Not even 20% of people would identify as a feminist, even if all of their beliefs align with what a feminist is and what feminists have traditionally pushed for. Because we still live in a very liberal society. We still have a lot of economic and social freedom compared to other parts of the world. So I don't really buy a lot of these criticisms, and I really think there's a whole lot of myopia going on about the dangers of feminism. What about the dangers of patriarchy and gender norms? That's the reason we have so many of these problems. It's a huge, huge elephant in the room, and people are becoming more aware of it over time, but you're having any kind of progress in that direction is met with huge amounts of backlash.
Yeah, I think that's. I guess I don't have any points of disagreement. I think that, I think it's interesting to look at, because I like looking as far back as I can to kind of, when we're talking about cultural ideas and things, I like to come up and look at like where they're from. And I was listening to Jordan Peterson, and he had an interesting idea, and I can't really confirm or deny that there really is that this is really true. Why men may be more dominant in most cultures. It's largely because of how difficult it is to be a childbearing woman and survive on your own in the wild, right? It sets you back when you have a kid, because human babies are very hard to take care of and they need a lot of attention, right? So it puts you in a disadvantage if you're going to live all by yourself in nature. And so there's a reason why women would become dependent on men, right? And then that creates a power structure, right? So that might be where that arises in nature. But we live in a much different society, and we could argue whether that's beneficial then or not, whether men being dominant. And I don't think it is useful in that situation. But that's where dependence comes from, and dependence then can foster power, right? Because if you depend on somebody, then they control you in some way. But I think
the power has always been slanted in favor of men because of their physical strength over women. Even if you didn't want to bear children throughout much of history, you didn't really have a choice in the matter whether or not that baby was going to weigh you down, because you could be raped, or you could be married off to someone and then raped, or whatever way you want to put it. So much of how we exist now comes from thousands and thousands of years of men raping women, basically.
Yeah, actually, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of it, right? There's like, you think about like some of the most famous figures in history, right? Like somebody like Genghis Khan, there's a reason why most of the people on Earth have his DNA, because he was a terrible rapist. I don't know how many poor women fell under victimhood of the Mongols, right? As they raced across an entire continent, and that shapes history a lot. So that you're right, that happens, and in most cultures, women are treated as property, as something to to try to get rid of a lot of the time, where or maybe not a lot of the time, but in many cultures that is the case. And more looked at as a resource than as as fellow individuals. And I think that and I don't know, I think that we've progressed a long ways, but it's ridiculous to say that that those that history doesn't affect us still. Just because we have the understanding of, oh yeah, that was wrong, doesn't mean it isn't still there. Doesn't mean that it's still not affecting you, because if that was a strategy that your ancestors applied, raping women to procreate, then that DNA is still in you, and it's still an issue that needs to be talked about, not kind of, because my kind of opinion, I think, has softly been, maybe my more recent opinion would have been like, oh yeah, it's been a problem in the past, but we've solved these feminist issues in America, at least. But my mind has changed further from that. I think that it's I just don't buy that, because that doesn't make sense to me, in terms of how trauma affects people, and how evolution affects people.
Yes, and we're finding that science backs a lot of this up, especially in the field of epigenetics, this kind of inherited trauma, or I'm sorry, not inherited trauma, cut that out, this kind of inherited trauma that your ancestors may have gone through. Mm-hmm. That science is starting to bear out that a lot of the problems that we're experiencing now, maybe as far as mental illness and things like that, are shaped by very traumatic problems that our ancestors have gone through. And I think that's something to consider when we're talking about social issues. And I think in some ways we're reaching a bit of a critical mass with some awareness about how serious of a problem things like sexually intimidating acts are to women. For example, the whole Me Too campaign recently. What were your thoughts on that? Did that kind of open your eyes to how widespread some of these problems feminists have been talking about are?
Yeah, actually, I would say that was kind of the most recent big shift was there. I was like, oh, okay, wow, yes. So yeah, I would say that definitely opened my eyes to, um, yeah, that there was a lot more people affected by issues like sexual harassment and assault. Definitely showed me that.
Yeah, it's like, hey, it turns out women were right all along and we weren't crazy harpies just making this shit up for shits and giggles. I mean, this is very clearly systemic, and it's oftentimes figures that we really, really like. And again, the problem comes back to power. You know, when you have a group of people that is so much more physically dominant over another group of people, it's not hard to see how they would exploit that power. Even if they're very morally upright and good people, even the best, most moral, virtuous people have a hard time contending with power that's given to them, let alone any random dipshit out there who has a little bit of power, which, to be fair, is a pretty large percentage of people. A large percentage of people are not upright, virtuous, moral people. A lot of people are self-motivated and, you know, a little greedy and kind of, you know, somewhat careless. And so if you're able to have that advantage over other people, oftentimes it's going to be exploited. How do we change that? It's a huge undertaking. Women have been talking about this stuff for hundreds of years. And again, we're just now getting to a point of some kind of critical awareness about it in a lot of the Western world. And it's not even scratching the surface of problems in developing countries.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, yeah, I guess, well, yeah, what do you do immediately? I'm not sure. I'm sure there are like, I'm trying to like think of like steps we could take if we were gonna make a um, incremental step plan to get to feminist paradise. I don't know, but I think at least for me, you know what? Because I've looked at it, because it just, I mean, like in the last year, I've kind of been paying a little bit more attention to, like, because I've been aware of, okay, yeah, there are these issues, and okay, maybe they affect more people than I thought, but then, and it's also, I've been trying to think more about how have I actually, you know, made how have I contributed to the problem or a solution? I guess both is kind of what I'm looking at, and I think that's where the change really needs to start is to have that honest conversation with yourself, especially if you're a man. I think are um, have you maybe unconsciously um, used your power in a way that was manipulative. And I've thought about it, and I've never sexually manipulated anybody into any sexual favor. I don't, you know, it just never happened. Even as a kid, you know, I watched a lot of my friends, because when I was, you know, when I was growing up, it was, yeah, everybody had a cell phone. We were the first kids to kind of be in school with these screen devices, and so a lot of young people were sending each other naked pictures. And I was one of the few kids who did not take an interest because because I was scared. I was like, oh, you can get in trouble for that. That's illegal, and it is illegal. And I know, and like I had a few friends who got in some pretty serious trouble over it. But they didn't stop it, right? And there was a lot of kids um, who I would say that it wasn't a I don't it was dishonest. Like, so guys were showing, you know, pics that girls have sent them, and I think that, you know, that's middle school is kind of where my introduction to anything like that was, and I didn't really realize that as, oh, maybe that's a problem. Maybe you know, how did that affect those girls? And then I didn't think about that until recently. But things like that, I think, is where I think most people are, you know, if you want to make a change, I think that's the most important part is paying attention to, oh, what personal responsibility do I have here? And I've been exploring more of that and thinking more about how do you do, like, you know, where have I been a problem, and I do think I'd like to think I'm a pretty nice guy, you know, because I haven't done a lot of things, but I absolutely have been. There are little things where I could have said, hey, no, my friend, to my friends or something, don't do that, or don't talk to somebody that way. Don't say that thing, or don't go talk to that girl just because um, you know, you think she's pretty and you think she deserves your attention. Um, there's little things like that that maybe, you know, I think that that's where at least maybe that's my thought is that's where I can help. But I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that is a good idea. So, regardless of any kind of ideology, because I draw from a lot of different philosophies and ideologies to kind of shape my worldview. I'm not a huge fan of labels. I don't call myself a libertarian. I don't call myself an anarcho-capitalist or anything like that. What I would like to see is a consent-based culture. And I think taking personal responsibility for things you may have done in the past is a really good step. And also recognizing what women go through and being aware of how your male friends are treating women and standing up for women when you see things like that happening. There are a lot of things men can do that require very little effort to help further a kind of consent-based society. So, for example, like you said, being aware of the issue, that's the first step, like being aware that there's a problem, admitting there's a problem, doing some introspection and reflection on, you know, what part did you kind of play in some of these problems, if any. I'm not saying all men are terrible and they've all done terrible things or anything like that. Some men are, you know, haven't, but a lot of people have kind of fallen into some bad traps because of bad socialization and bad gender norms and cultural norms. And then externalizing that and saying, okay, well, these are the things I know to be true. These are the ways that I want to act and the kind of virtues that I believe in. So when you see other people being abusive or predatory or things like that, sticking up for women. And also another thing, and this is a huge thing that is, it's such an important piece of the puzzle, and it's also so easy to do, and that's believe women. And a lot of people weirdly have, so it's kind of weird what we're selectively skeptical about. You know, like
Mm-hmm.
we won't be skeptical about you know, a lot of times, for example, if there's police brutality against someone and it's fairly evident, you know, what happened in the situation. Obviously, you have a huge power difference between police and people. Police are more likely to be abusive because of that power dynamic, right? Like we accept that for the, like most informed people, regardless of where you're at on the ideological spectrum, most informed people recognize that that disparity of power creates a lot of abuse. Why wouldn't that also apply to interactions between men and women, for example, or people who are gender conforming and non-gender conforming, or gay or straight or whatever? Because culture is so slanted in one kind of dominant way, you have people who have certain degrees of power, even if it's in small ways, over other people. And that does lead to certain types of exploitation and oppression. And statistics back up the believe women kind of thing, right? This isn't something that I'm calling for you to suspend all skepticism and stuff like that. Just statistically speaking, you are going to be more likely on the side of reality and the correct way of thinking about things if you believe a woman, if she tells you that she's been harassed or she's been assaulted or raped or something like that. The incidences of false reporting on these crimes is not only extremely low, but we've been able to identify why they happen and the circumstances around those that make them special to those very small percentages. But again, it's a missing the forest for the trees kind of thing, because people will freak out about the false rape statistic thing when 97% of rapes are not prosecuted. And something like, there have been some counties where 90% of rape kits were never tested by the police. The amount of turmoil and trauma that you have to go through to even report a rape to the police is almost insurmountable. It is, oftentimes they call it the second rape, because you have to go through this process that is completely dehumanizing, and this interrogation that just breaks you down, and you're asked, well, what were you doing at night? Why were you wearing that? Why were you hanging around those people? Why were you drinking? And it all comes from this very puritanical view of what women should be, doing in society. Why can't I walk around at 4 o'clock in the morning? Why do I have to worry about that? Why can't I, be hanging out with men? Why do I have to worry about all of these things? Why can't I just exist in the same way that they're allowed to exist? So yeah, believe women, support them, especially when you have good reason to, which, most of the time you do. Again, women are not trying to make things up. We're not trying to put a bunch of extra stress and trauma onto ourselves for some evil, nefarious, underhanded reasons. And it's frustrating when you see people take these and use that as if it discredits the mountain of evidence suggesting that, hey, there's a problem of power here. There's a problem, and this problem of power, this power disparity, leads to lots of extreme violence against women. Again, and I tried to understand the other side of this. I diligently tried, and one of the points that people on the men's rights side will kind of bring up is well, men disproportionately face violence. That's still from other men. Again, we're just talking about numbers. This is totally based in math. This is not based in feelings or anything like that. This is statistically and scientifically supported that men create, 90% plus 95% of the violence in the world against each other and against women. And I can't help but think that if it were slanted in the other direction, if it was women creating 90+% of the violence in the world, that, you'd have even more. It would be an entirely different thing. You're seen as crazy for just talking about statistics and evidence and what reality actually is. And so, yeah, again, believe women, support them, trust that they're not making these things up to be nefarious and underhanded. Again, it's a very rare occurrence. And yeah, do some studying, read some books on it. There are a lot of really good books out there that are tackling a lot of the subjects that men face as well. This is another thing that I was reading when I was reading a lot of men's rights stuff. A lot of the stuff that they're promoting, feminists have been talking about for decades, if not centuries. There's probably a feminist book on whatever topic you're worried about as a man. because we've deconstructed this all along. We just haven't really been listened to or acknowledged. There is still that idea of treating women as public property. And this is, like you said earlier, women were historically treated as property, and they still are. I've not been allowed to escape any kind of violence due to my presentation, despite what MRAs will say, which is that, men face more violence and stuff than women. Yes, but also regardless of how feminine I presented or how masculine I presented or tomboyish or whatever, I've been violently attacked or sexually harassed by men a lot in my life in very strange ways. I mean, I've been headbutted out of nowhere at shows. I've been hit in the face. I mean, I've been, picked up against my will. And I've written about a lot of this stuff. It's all on Patreon, and all of that. And it's weird. And the reason I'm so outspoken about it, and I've gotten more outspoken, I think a lot of people were probably like, wow, MK really went off the rails in the last 3 years. She used to be so nice. She used to be so even keeled. I've just gotten more aware of this stuff, and my life has been a lot more impacted by violence in the last few years, and that has radicalized me. And I am going to be outspoken about it, and I really do try to approach discussions in good faith, but it's not my responsibility to pull a conversation out of the gutter if someone starts it there. If someone immediately starts insulting me, I am not responsible for being deferential to them and nice to them. They didn't have to be nice to me, but it's assumed that I should be nice or I'm some kind of terrible, SJW bitch or something. And I don't play that game. And that's why I think I am seen as more controversial or whatever, is because I stopped playing the game. I stopped being nice to people who are not nice to me first. If you approach a conversation with respect and trying to understand things better, I am all ears, and I will do my best to give all of the resources I can to you, because I have a ton. I've read a lot of books. I've have a vast understanding of just a lot of different topics here. But as soon as you start, accusing me of things without knowing me and, trying to argue and start a fight, I mean, I guess you can say I've lost my patience with a lot of it. I've stopped giving a shit, and that's my old, punk rock, rough kind of upbringing background. I mean, men don't have to be nice and sweet to each other when they're talking to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's this. I've kind of noticed that there's maybe because I've only been here for 19 years, right, on this planet. I guess I really don't know, but it does seem to me that there are more and more people in general, not just on the specific issue of feminism, but a lot more people are becoming more and more outspoken and more doing it in a way that's very authentic. And I was thinking about this as I was listening to Iconosass this week, and this sort of off topic, but I think I can bring it back. I think it's really interesting. Like you were talking about how you're shifting your focus to interviews and looking at the way that people live their life. I think that they're I've noticed this in particularly the podcasting community. I've noticed a shift towards more of this focus on, I guess, talking to people and exploring ideas in a respectable way. And the greatest example, I think, and probably the most well-known example is the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. And I really enjoy how he's been able to do that and how he's been able to cultivate these conversations. And I think that this is the same thing that I'm trying to do. And I think that that's really where I think what I'm noticing is that there's a lot more podcasters and I think people in general that are interested in that sort of media and that sort of message, that way of going about ideas, because there are a lot of ideas out in, in this world. There's so many. There's so many philosophies, so many ways to look at how the world works, but there hasn't been a lot of how do we put it all together, because we've been separated without the internet. It's just haven't the access to information wasn't that big. Now we have this giant the ultimate access to information. I mean, it's any question you have is pretty much seconds away. There's some obscure ones. There's plenty of things that maybe Google can't find you. You can find those things that you won't be able to find online, but if you look hard enough, it's almost always. So my point is that I think that there is this like, I guess, where was I going? I wanted to say that there absolutely is becoming a larger conversation. I think people are getting better at doing this online. But I think it comes out of like as you're saying that it's upsetting when people don't don't give you the respect that you deserve, and that's typical, especially online, for whatever
Oh, I don't think I
reason.
deserve any kind of respect. Um,
Sure.
but at least be honest with it. At least be honest that I've read several books on this topic, and this person spouting feminism as cultural Marxism probably hasn't read one.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Right. So yeah, I think you're right, but I think there's a large amount of people who are just like that. But I am happy to see that there are more and more. But I don't know. I think it's a slow change, and yeah, I don't know how it'll work. Um, but I think it's one thing that, yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking. I had a thought earlier. In regards to like the Me Too hashtag Me Too thing. It was really surprising for me to see how many people in my life have been affected by that kind of violence, and it's really upsetting to me because this is something that is really. I mean, it's kind of obvious why rape would bother somebody. It's an extremely violent act. I think it's probably the worst thing you can do to somebody. Um, it's very upsetting, but like when I was young, and this is kind of like my journey through personal development started because I had this girlfriend in middle school where it's how much of a relationship that really is in middle school. Who knows? But we got really close over a couple years of knowing this girl. And I found out that she had been raped by her grandfather. Um, and man, it was like the first time I'd ever really known, oh, that can happen to somebody as a kid. And since then, that's really bugged me. Um, and I don't know, that's somewhat of a traumatic thing for me. Because this girl ended up committing suicide. Um, I don't know, when she was about 14. And that's a terrible thing
Wow.
to see that happen to somebody, because that's such a damaging thing. So what I wanted to get to here is um that's like, I don't know, I guess it upsets me that it is an issue, and I think that like part of it, my reluctance to recognize it as an issue was that, oh, that it's so uncomfortable to think about. But the point I wanted to get to is I'm sorry, I'm joking up a little bit. It's hard to think about
Oh, that's
sometimes.
okay. That's really sad. That's really terrible.
Yeah, so I guess yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I was going with this. It made me forget. I apologize, but um,
That's okay. I mean, it's okay to have strong feelings about that and express those feelings. And ultimately, that's the type of world I'd like to see, where men can talk about the things that have happened to them too, and the way that it's affected them, and not be met with ridicule or things like that. I want everyone to be able to be emotionally open and vulnerable about these topics, and it be a world where they can be vulnerable and not be attacked. And I don't know that we'll ever get to that. I mean, it's extremely idealistic, but ultimately that's what I'd like to see, and that's why I talk about the things I talk about. I mean, this whole, whether you even want to call it feminism, I mean, it is feminism, but destroying gender norms is extremely beneficial for all genders and all people.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think that's been, I think the most important piece to like my personal development in general has been accepting vulnerability and emotional vulnerability. Um, I think that's where a lot of issues kind of lie in our culture, and because a lot of it comes from trauma, not just um, sexual assault based trauma, but in general, just being treated poorly, being raised by shitty parents. That really is, I think, where a lot of these issues come from, because you spend your, that's how you learn. If you learn about the world from shitty people, you're going to have a shitty outlook on the world at first, right? Until you learn. And I think you're right that, like, at least like, and this is kind of where my focus is as pointed is, I think that if we do want any of these solutions, from smashing gender norms to the end of the coercive enterprise called the state, the change does have to happen in kind of recognizing what has happened to us, and how we can change who we are, and how what has happened to us has made that, and what we can do to become somebody that we'd rather be. But yeah, I don't know if we'll ever get there either. It's an interesting thought. I think that there, I don't know. I don't know. It's like that. There's an interesting question. I thought I had something to kind of build off of with, are we ever going to get there? I don't know, because looking at history, you don't really know. But what do you think about the? What do you think about how do you? I think we've progressed as a species, in general. But what do you think about that? Because I think it's pretty clear that most of the ideas that we're talking about here are pretty unique to developed countries and the richer developed countries, and a lot of that I think comes from our ability. We have a little bit more leisure, or maybe not a little bit more, but maybe quite a lot more leisure time than other people, and more of an ability to think about these ideas. Yeah, do you think that what do you think are the so okay, let me let me ask one thing at a time. Do you think that there has been a progression on ideas, a positive progression, in how people look at how society should be organized, and how people in that society should be treated? Do you think we've progressed, and if so, why do you think we have, and if not, why do you think we haven't?
Oh, absolutely. I think things have gotten better overall. And, one idea that Steven Pinker is kind of popularized, I don't agree with everything he's written about, but overall, violent crime has decreased, and it continues to decrease over time. We don't see as many wars that wipe out as many massive amounts of people, and all the things that go along with wars, which is, raping and pillaging and enslavement and all of these things. We still, of course, have imperialism, and I mean, there still are wars going on, and there is still a lot of violence in the world, but overall you're seeing decreases in violence as time goes on. And you're also seeing people becoming more aware and developing terminology for things that we weren't quite able to name before. And I think this is interesting, the way language is changing. I was an English major, and I'm such a language kind of nerd about this stuff. But we're seeing terms for things that we've known on an intuitive level existed, but we're not quite able to express. And now you've seen this kind of deconstruction of language And I think the internet has played a huge role in that. And I am very excited about this progression because we're finding ways to describe things like never before. And I'm not like a literalist when it comes to the English language. I don't believe that proper grammar is the best thing ever, and all of these things that you're kind of taught in school. I love that we're able to use images to express a feeling now. I think that's a very powerful thing. Using like a GIF or something, or an emoticon or something like that. I mean, I think of so many conversations with my friends now and how conversations have changed over the years. And I can find like a sticker on Facebook or a GIF or something on Twitter or anywhere to perfectly describe what I'm trying to express. So I think we're getting better at communicating the nuances of emotions. And that's very important because there is so much nuance to emotions. There is so much variety in the human experience. And I think as we gain more awareness about the different types of experiences people can have, that's really crucial in furthering progress too. And I mean, there are political ways of, pushing progress, and I don't hold out hope that we're going to end up in any kind of ideal society. I don't do what I do. I don't write the things that I write because I believe that it's going to bring us to utopia. I don't think I'm going to see utopia in my lifetime. In fact, I'm fairly certain that I won't. But what I can do with the work that I do is inspire individuals to create better lives for themselves. I've shifted my focus in recent years to a more private kind of activism. I'm a lot more active in private groups now. I'm active in more types of emotional support groups for people, specifically people who've been abused, and that they do tend to kind of be majority women. But, I don't do what I do because I think it's going to bring some broad sweeping change to the world. I do it because I know that it's helped individual people better their circumstances, and being able to see another person thrive once they're out of a dangerous situation is meaningful to me. And so what it comes down to is finding what's meaningful to you and acting on that. You can't have expectations that what you're going to do is going to change the world. That sets you up for a lot of failure. But what you can do is create things that enrich the lives of individual people. And in doing that, over time, things do get better. And that's why I've always had a strong connection to the humanities and the arts, because I think that's one of the best ways to encourage that. It's not through politics. I don't really think it's through academia or philosophy, although you need that. I think those do provide a other form of insight into the world. But I think ultimately it comes down to creating things that elevate the human condition past its kind of animalistic tendencies, which animalistic tendencies I would categorize as, violence a lot of times, war, all of these things we do to hurt each other and gain dominance because we think we have to dominate.
Yeah, I completely agree on this. You stated exactly how that's the kind of I don't know, the mindset that I'm always trying to grasp for is because sometimes I'm not on it, right? Is the idea is to make life better for people around me because that makes life better for me. I'm an egoist when it comes down to it, right? I do these things for me because it makes me feel good.
We all are, really. I mean, whether we want to deny it or not.
Yeah, and I think I don't know. it's very. I just want to say that it's very. I don't know what's the word. Not constructive it's exciting, encouraging is the word. That's what I was looking for. I just feel like I'm like I'm looking at a lot of different people, a lot of different things. Like I've been recently trying to get away from, I mean, maybe not get away completely from the libertarian movement, but step outside of it.
Run, child, run.
Because I'm looking at, there aren't enough libertarians in my area to make the difference that I want to see. So now I'm kind of looking at, well, where is the difference that I can make in my area? But what I'm finding is I look at more groups of people, like an example would be the mixed mental arts crowd. Where there are others, I don't know. There's plenty. People, and I don't know. There are some, like I thought of a couple groups. I'm like, no, that doesn't actually fit. So, but the MMA one, the mixed mental arts, the kind of the mindset that I'm thinking about is this idea of how do we create this change? And I'm seeing a lot of similar patterns with these groups of people, in this idea of how do we affect change and how do we do this? And it's very encouraging to see people like you and I'm thinking of Brett Venat did his like School Sucks Across America thing, and he's kind of looking out again. It seems like a lot of people are looking at what can we do differently than what we've been doing in the past. Because the activism stuff sort of like it got us some attention, like the Free Keeners did. But what did that do for libertarianism in the longer run, or at least let's throw away the label. But what did it do to promote freedom in New Hampshire? I don't know. Maybe people could make an argument there is, but it's not very significant and it's not obvious to me. And so I'm curious of how are people enacting different changes. And I think what you described is very similar, at least to the way I'm looking at things. And I do think that is an improvement, and I hope that will continue to be an improvement. But like as you said, you don't know if there's going to be utopia. You never really know what the future is. The American empire could collapse and throw us into a new dark age. Who knows? But what does matter is, are you making a change for other people? Are you affecting individuals? Because I don't know, I found that that's very much more rewarding than trying to preach to the masses.
Well, yeah, you can't have those expectations that you're going to affect change. It does not serve you to have those kinds of expectations. It will only make you disappointed in humanity. So create the things that give meaning to you, and if those enrich the lives of other people, they will let you know, and then you'll be able to be pleasantly surprised. And that's what I've been doing the last couple of years, and I have to say I'm a lot more at peace with things. I mean, of course, I'm still frustrated because, and I think this is true with a lot of people who've been activists, we're very much idealists. We can see a vision of the world as so much better than it is. But then we're stuck having to contend with reality, which is so backwards and far away from that kind of ideal. And it can drive you crazy, stressing out about it so much and trying to find the perfect strategy to affect change. So like letting go of trying to affect change is extremely liberating. And it opens you up to creating new things and learning new things, and it doesn't have to be that you're stuck in any kind of ideological chamber. I mean, libertarianism is not going to fix all of the problems of the world. Any flavor of anarchism isn't really either. Change comes extremely slowly and incrementally over time, and the best that we can hope for is keep striving for the values that we believe in. And you can find a lot of shared values with people that don't use the same labels as you. You can, it comes down to like, what do you want those values to be? And I realized a while ago, like a long time ago, that certain political, I don't hold political philosophies as values. Values are independent from politics and from ideology. And not enough people, I think, realize this in any kind of ideology, whether it's communism or libertarianism or anything like that. You have a lot of people who feel that they can have a certain affinity with other people because they share the same label, and that's just not true. You have to find the good people, no matter where they are or what they call themselves, who share the same kind of values that you do.
Yeah, because what matters is if you're being a dick or not. Whether if you're, it doesn't, the non-aggression principle doesn't matter. Like, who cares if you're not harming anybody if you're just being an asshole? You're still an asshole and you still suck.
Yes, that's a huge problem in libertarianism.
Yeah, so I agree. I think that I'd like to see more of that, and I think there are more people changing. But yeah, I think that's a good point on the values thing, because it isn't about, oh, this is my solution to come up with the world. Because I think it's just more important to look at what is um, how is being on this earth going, like for you and then the people around you. Can you make it better? And to me, that's what's important. It's like, is this going all right? It's more of the consequences over the ideology or the method that we're using. I think that's more important.
Yeah, I'm a very, big believer in certain consequentialist schools of thought. Like what happens after? What are the results? What are the consequences to your actions? And if you don't learn from the consequences of your actions, then you're never going to progress. You're never going to get better. And I'm very much concerned with becoming a better person as I get older. I think I'm a much better person now than I was 10 years ago, when I was almost your age. Like I don't want to be the same person that I was 10 years ago. And that's when I got very much involved in libertarianism. And it's been like a long progression, and I've had to move away from it because I found a lot of the elements extremely toxic, and I found fulfillment in other areas. And just, I will say, like, I'm very happy to know a wide variety of people across, the ideological spectrum that I think are very good people with very strong values and are very pro human rights and human thriving and things like that. You're not going to find someone you agree with 100%. And, and I try to be understanding with people, as much as they are understanding with me. Again, I have a short amount of patience sometimes. And that comes from years of being maybe, I think you can be too patient, and you can put up with too much abuse and too much negativity and people trying to harm you. And that is not healthy. So trying to find balance for me has been a bit of a struggle, and it's been a very public struggle. I've written about it and things like that. But I think it's worthwhile, and ultimately it's led me to some of the best people. I'm very happy with the people I stay in touch with, and the different variety of circles I've been involved in. I mean, I've been a bit of a tribe hopper, I've been involved with like punks and hippies and, different various flavors of radical activists or less radical activists, more kind of in the political field of activism, or, degenerates or whatever people want to call them. I'm very interested in like like sex worker rights now. I think that's a huge group of people who were extremely oppressed by the state and cultural and social norms. And yeah, I mean, I like people who have a story to tell and interesting people, and I've, tried to live an interesting life, and it's led me to some weird places, but I think it's also made me a pretty fun and interesting and understanding person, even though I come off pretty abrasive sometimes. I can admit that. I know that I'm mouthy, and I know that I'm pretty abrasive. I'm very self-aware of it.
You've been pleasant to me, and I don't think we've ever had much beef. So, but
yeah, we've been cool.
I think people like there's certain people who I have not been able to really find much disagreement with, and it's like people, and I think the center around it usually is Jim Jesus somehow. There's a lot of people I'm connected to through Jim Jesus, it seems, that are just, and it's not like, maybe it's not through Jim Jesus, but everybody's connected to Jim Jesus, and he's one of those people too that I just find like who follow the same kind of ideas. Like, I don't know, you're expressing the same ideas that I've been talking about for years, and like in just in slightly different ways, right? I don't know, we all have these very similar common values, and it's interesting that I was talking to Jeremy Hengeler about this, and I just released that episode today, but it doesn't really matter because it's out by the time this comes out. Whatever. No, I just think it's interesting that there's a lot of people around that do have similar ideas. And they aren't all connected to Jim Jesus, but I just thought it was an interesting thing. It came to my mind that there are a lot of people who are related to these. I don't know where. I've been trying to figure out where is the pattern, but there are a good number of good people around, and I'm happy to be in touch with so many people, and I don't know. I'm happy to see that you have had a similar experience, and I don't know. It's very fun to hear what people are doing, and I don't know, I understand how their experience is, like you said. We could probably end the show here. How much time do you have? Because I do have a couple more questions I could ask you.
I mean, I'm pretty much free for the night. So, but yeah, I agree with you. Jim is one of my favorite people, and you know what? And I always say this about Jim. I was just talking about this with Jim, fighting him. Like, I'm always like, we'll message each other and be like, I'll fight you on this. Like, let's fight. And I love it because, it's like iron sharpening iron. I like to be challenged on my bullshit, and he does too. And people who are outspoken and, have strong values and are outspoken about those strong values are awesome. Especially so if they allow those ideas to be criticized, and if they are open to hashing it out and discussing it. And that's something I respect about Jim Jesus is we can debate about stuff, and we're not taking things personally. We have our disagreements with things, but I think he's a great dude. And I think that for a lot of people I've met through different types of activism and stuff like that, I mean, ultimately it does come down to a certain set of shared values and how you implement those values. There's going to be debates and disagreements between all of that. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, a lot of people want the same kinds of things. A lot of people want to be free, and they want to be able to be free to express themselves and not be punished for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So why can't we all get along? No, but
because there's Nazis, man.
That's right.
There's these fucking Nazis, and
yeah,
and they want to throw me out of a helicopter, and I don't care for it. I do not care for it. And also, like, what's more offensive about that to me is not that they literally do want to throw me out of a helicopter, but that it's an old joke by now. I mean, come on, what are we in 2013? Like, update your material. Like, give me something to work with here. Like, be creative if you're gonna insult me.
Yeah, it's it isn't the greatest one. Yeah, I don't know. I don't. I remember we had a conversation about the like conservative versus progressive changes in the culture, particularly around libertarianism, and this is really when Brett Veinotte was talking about this on his podcast, and like I thought at first, I as I was looking at these ideas, like, oh well, okay, I do have an affinity for the right. I like these people. I am more conservative because of the way I've been brought up, and then I looked at it even more, and I thought, well, maybe it's true. I do have this tendency this way, but do I like that? And I thought, no, actually, I don't, because there are a number of issues with that. With I don't know, if we take conservative meaning, keep the traditions. Um, there aren't that many traditions that are that fantastic. Um,
Yeah,
and I've never been able to
especially
find
if
where
you're a
these.
woman.
Yeah, but I've never been able to like the traditions that these alt-right people give out would be like freedom of speech and I don't know, I can't think of any more. I don't think there are very many like these kind of traditional Western values. I don't know what those are.
Guess what? Leftists were just as much promoters of free speech. Actually, if not more so, the whole free speech thing is an extremely progressive liberal concept. It flies in the face of historical conservatism, which
Mm-hmm.
originally meant a very intertwined church and state. And the church was telling the state what laws to pass for what people could say. I mean, you look at so many different so many historical acts of violence. So you have things like the Inquisition, and then even later than that, if you bring it around to the United States, for example, you had McCarthyism. That was a huge right-wing movement that was very much against free speech.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, if you disagreed with McCarthy and that whole administration, you were deemed a communist and you had an FBI file on you. They had FBI files on so many jazz musicians. In fact, there's this incredible article. I'll have to find it and send it to you. But it's basically how the FBI killed Billie Holiday. And I mean, they stalked her for years. She was a very outspoken musician, hugely influential, and Harry Anslinger, basically the guy who founded the precursor to the Drug Enforcement Agency. It was called something else in the past, but he founded the precursor to that, basically had a whole squad on her, just trying to ruin her life.
Wow.
I mean, we're talking about like interrogating, like having cops visiting her in the hospital, as she's like dying. I mean, just completely outrageous stuff. Like, this is what the government did to people, and it was in the name of conservative values, which were very anti-free speech. The whole idea that the right are champions of free speech is completely absurd to me. These people, you give them any shred of power and they will shut it down. And granted, some leftists are like this too. Some like neoliberal, progressive, Democrat kind of people. But if you look at things historically speaking, those people are still fairly far to the right of hardcore free speech activists. you know.
So then free speech isn't even a tradition American value. I mean, I guess maybe American, but it's not. I don't know. It's not conservative, right? It's a very progressive idea.
I have to send you. I don't know if you watch any of ContraPoint's videos. Do
I
you
think I've
watch
watched
her
a
videos?
couple. I don't, not very often, but I think you've posted them. I think I've seen them before.
I've definitely posted one of the best videos she's done, and I think I will recommend it to all the listeners that you have. I recommend it to everyone. It's called "Does the Left Hate Free Speech?" And she deconstructs this so well. This whole idea that conservatives are champions of free speech. They're not. They're very specific about the type of speech that they want to protect. And we see, especially if you're part of a group that is not in their club, we see what types of speech they're protecting. It's not queer speech. It's not degenerate speech. It's not, it's not my speech. It's not what I want to talk about. It's the speech of the Nazis and the KKK. And I know this is going to sound super inflammatory, but it's true. And historically, this is bared out throughout history. So I'll send you that video too, or you can find it on YouTube. It's called "Does the Left Hate Free Speech?" And I think it's required watching material. If people are going to want to debate about free speech, because it totally throws out this whole notion that it has anything to do with conservatism. Conservatism as an ideology is about keeping things the same. It's about conserving the traditional norms that have always been. And again, this is something science bears out. Those norms are harmful to the majority of people and completely counterproductive to any kind of human thriving. It's okay if people prefer them. It's totally like, I want a free world where people are free to live in their traditionalist families. Like if people want that for themselves, if that's what makes them happy, that's what I want them to have. But those people do not want me to be free. And that's the difference. I want to be a degenerate, and I want them to have their traditional families, and we can go our own way and be fine. They cannot bear the thought of me not fitting into their structure. And that's a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what I find with the right is that it's like we are, like, as a society in the West, at least, I think all over the world, I guess it is slowly happening, but as we do adopt more and more, or kind of, I guess, smash more and more of these traditional cultural norms, like, gay, what would you call this? I guess the prohibition of same-sex marriage, I guess. Like, that's one of those things that, like, it was one of my, because I was more right leaning then when this was happening, when the what is it, the Supreme Court of the United States made their ruling. Like, my thought is, oh great, now the Republicans can stop, so that they can just stop talking about gay marriage, so maybe they'll win an election finally. But I think that, like, kind of what I'm getting there, like, my point behind that is that it seems like it's a lot of just kind of throwing themselves behind the next thing they're trying to stop from happening. And I, like, the transgender bathroom thing was a big one, where they just, like, for whatever reason, they get so upset. And
who are the perverts here? Okay, real quick. Who are the perverts? The people who are obsessively thinking about the genitals of other people, or the people who don't ever think about those things? Like, I never walk into a bathroom to take a shit, and I'm just, like, sitting there ruminating about whether or not the genitals next to me match mine. Like, that's such a weird, like, fucked up thing to think about, right? Like, who's the degenerate, really?
Yeah.
Like, do you ever think of that? Like, are you ever, like,
No.
going into, like, a public bathroom just like, man, you know what? Like, dude better not walk in here with a twat. Like, I will throw down.
No, I've never thought that. I don't think I've ever wondered like,
Like,
about anything.
healthy, secure people don't worry about these things. Because, like, we're not trying to spend a lot of time in a public bathroom anyway, right?
Right, right, trying to get out.
Exactly. I'm in and out. I'm there for one specific purpose, and it's not to, like, harass people with different holes in different locations on their body than me. Like, what a weird fixation.
Yeah, I mean it's weird. It is weird, and I wonder why it happens. Why do they get so upset about these things? And to me, it's well, it has to be about the tradition thing. That this is what they're comfortable with. This is what they grew up with, and it's like, oh, geez, that can't change. And I think it really is like it's a fear of change, and I wonder if it relates to well, if you know the if we I don't know what is it. I try to wonder because they they all not they all I'm trying not to use collectivist language, but many of the conservatives that I was watching who had these objections to this particular issue on transgender bathrooms, like the thing was, oh well, because men will pretend to be women and rape kids, and, and that's such a I don't know. I've never heard of that happening, so I was like, well, where does this fear come from? So I don't know. Like that's just to me, it's very strange that this is what these people are looking for anything they can get to stop certain changes. Like the gay marriage thing, like that one lady who's like, nah, I'm not signing gay people's marriage certificates. And so many people like paraded and said, hey, this is a great woman. I just do not understand that mentality.
What a stupid hill to die on, you know?
Right.
Like, what a, like, weird thing that has no effect on you or anything to do with your life to dwell on and worry about and stand in the way for other people who you would probably get along fine with if they came to your barbecue and you just like sat down and had a conversation with them, you know? But, well, and there is, you know, I don't want to do too much projection here, but I think when it comes to a lot of these conservative people is what we're seeing is a lot of repression. What we're seeing is a lot of thoughts and a lot of feelings that they have as human beings, because we have these thoughts and feelings as human beings that we can't quite explain, and these desires that we don't always know where they come from. And they're ashamed of that because they've been taught to be ashamed of that. And it's very much instilled in them. And so they feel that they need to have shame over these very normal and very natural feelings that everyone experiences from time to time. And they just feel like they have to double down and stop other people from expressing a lot of the same feelings they're having. I mean, how common is it for a conservative politician to be caught with, you know, a male hooker or something like that, like a family like there was a story about this recently. Some guy's caught like having sex with like this guy, this other dude in his office, and he resigns and he's like so ashamed. And I just think like if he would have just been allowed to embrace that part of him, how much different, how much happier of a person he would be. And that's what I want for people. I mean, I have repressed my sexuality. Like I was an out bisexual when I was 18, and then I recloseted when I was 22. I mean, I repressed myself. And then I'll tell you what, repression doesn't fucking work, because then I was right back out, you know, not very long after that. I was like, you know what? No, I never stopped being bisexual. This is who I am, or pansexual, really. I mean, if you want to get specific, but you know, but yeah, I mean, I've gone through this. Like, I understand the kind of weird shame that's instilled in people, and it makes me extremely sad, because I just want people to be able to express themselves and in whatever way that they feel comfortable. And you know, everyone has some kind of agenda, you know, like I'm just honest about mine. Hell yeah. I'm like, you know, a fucking foot soldier in the gay agenda. Like you know, like I'm not gonna be dishonest. You know, I'm not trying to like pull any, you know, fast ones on anyone. I'm not trying to, you know, turn your wife gay or something like that. But you know, I'm also not gonna hide who I am. And what that's done, being more open about who I am and more honest about who I am, I think has helped a lot of people. I get messages all the time when I write about very uncomfortable topics. I mean, I really dove deep into some very, very uncomfortable topics. But I get messages of support from people being like, thank you for saying these things that I've wanted to say, and I've wanted to put my experience out there, but I'm afraid to, and I don't feel like I can right now, or it's not safe for me to talk about it, or it's not safe for me to be out of the closet, or things like that. And there are a lot of people out there, and, you know, again, that's why I do what I do. And I mean, you know, it's going to piss people off. It's going to make conservatives angry. But at the end of the day, I just want them to be free too. I mean, I'm going to fight them tooth and nail because what they want is repressive and damaging. And, you know, it hurts a lot of people. It causes permanent damage. But I do recognize that a lot of that is coming from a place of repression, and a lot of that is them venting and projecting and being angry because they can't be the person that they want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's, I don't know. I don't have anything to add to that, I guess. Worms.
Words. Am I allowed to say that? I'm an exile fiend. I've been defiend. I've been dewormed.
Gosh, I don't know.
You're still a fiend, right?
I am. I'm.
For now.
I shouldn't say anything, but I was thinking it's like so many people are dropping. It's like, kind of, you just wonder, well, geez, when am I next, or when am I gonna hop off this?
You either die a fiend or you live long enough to become a fiend in exile.
I don't think we've ever had any fiends die yet, but.
No, actually, I don't.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I guess actually, I think, no, I don't remember this. I'm like thinking of a story of like, this isn't true. This definitely hasn't happened, because I was thinking of like maybe Michael had I thought he told a story of how he brought somebody on the show, and then, but I'm just making this up. I'm gonna have to edit this out because it doesn't make any sense. It's just a weird brain thing that came, weird thought. Anyway, I guess I don't have anything else for you. This is a really fun conversation.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot of, I'm just like trying to think of as I'm talking. I'm kind of going back through it and re-summarizing it in my head. But I don't know. I think it's very interesting. I think this topic of, I guess, gender norms fits, and we kind of fit it into the larger topic of you know, what is it like to, you know, what is the experience on this of being a human being, and how do you make your life better? How do you make it great? I don't know. I guess that's kind of the recap. Is that, I'll give you the recap. What do you want people to get out of it? Well, actually, I want to stop. I want to ask you what I want to. Shit. I'm just thinking of how.
Ask me another question.
What I wanted to do is I wanted to have you plug, and then I was going to ask you and end off with my final question. So yeah, if you have any like other concluding thoughts, go ahead and throw them out, and then if you would tell people where they can find your other work and see what you're up to.
So yeah, I want everyone to feel free enough to be the person that they want to be, the person that they see themselves as, and, you know, feel that they are inside, absent of the social conditioning that we all experience. And we all experience it in varying degrees. and varying levels of intensity, and we all experience varying degrees of violence. And I hope that people can find a way to break free of that and be able to fully express who they are in ways that don't harm other people. And I think that a world where people are able to do that is ultimately going to be a better one. Obviously, that doesn't include Nazism and certain other things. But yeah, we're all just winging it, really, regardless of how put together we are, or how much we think we know, or how much we compare ourselves to other people. We're all just winging it on this weird rock flying through space. And I hope that people can find what they're looking for and find happiness. And you can find my work at patreon.com/mklords. I'm also on Medium. If you look for the name MK Lords on Medium, I've shifted my focus to more personal pieces of writing. Specifically, there's some satirical stuff on there too, that kind of deals with my struggles with depression and anxiety and stuff like that. It's a lot of stuff about gender. And I also do a podcast called Iconosass that's also on Patreon, and it's also on SoundCloud. You can find my stuff there, and that's more of an interview-based show, but sometimes I do solo episodes, and I have all kinds of cool people on. And again, it's a show where we're all just winging it. So I found that the more I try to control things, even in my own life, the less control I seem to have. And I'm, becoming more okay with that over time.
Awesome. Cool. So my question, first, I'll throw all those links in the show notes for everybody to find. And then my question was, is what would you like people to take out of this interview? And maybe you kind of answered that before you plugged your websites and stuff. But if you'd like to add to that, please do.
I hope that people get some entertainment value out of this, really. I mean, if I can make someone laugh or think about things in a kind of different perspective, that's cool with me. If I don't change anyone's mind, that's cool too, because I'm not trying to force you to believe the same things I believe. I think the world, as much of a weirdo as I am, I think if everyone believed the same things I believed, it would be really boring. Just like I think, a lot of other ideas are boring. So I would hope that one day that the radical ideas that I espouse become boring, and they're eventually challenged by people, and in ways that lead to more human flourishing for as many people as possible.
Absolutely cool. Well, thank you for joining me, and thank you all for listening.
Woo!
Cool. Hey there, guys. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I enjoyed talking to MK Lords, and I thought what we discussed was really interesting to me, and as I listened to it, I thought that it could have been taken slower, that we could have hit some of these topics more in depth and just a little bit longer. But it's hard to do when you're on Skype, and like for me, I don't throw together any preparation. I just have this vague idea of what I want to talk to these people about, and I invite them on my show, and I don't think about it until the day of, and then and whatever comes to mind. So I feel like today there was a lot of loose ideas thrown up, and we tacked down some of them that I think are important. But I think there were some other things that we left in the air. Like, we didn't really talk about specific gender norms, and I think that I should have asked more about gender norms because, well, I'm familiar with some, like, the male is supposed to be the breadwinner of the family and the guy going out working, and the woman is supposed to stay home and raise the children. that's an obvious stereotypical gender role that most people in this country may not agree to anymore, but it's certainly a part of the culture. And yeah, I don't think that you can find evidence that to the contrary, and you can find plenty of evidence that is um, that there are people who have an issue with the gender roles being switched. And I think that's natural. It's a natural thing to be wary of change and to, I don't know. I guess I get it because if something's considered a token of manhood and then it's taken away from you as a man, it's I don't know. It's not that fun. It makes you feel like you're not a man. And if you put emotional value into being a man, then wow, then that can really hurt you if this is your belief. So I think that as we talk about these norms that don't really make sense, they do make sense in some way. A woman is physically and anatomically better suited to take care of a child, right? And so it makes sense that they should be more involved with the child rearing. But at the same time, there are other things to take into account. Because you're not just having kids to reproduce, especially now. We don't need to make more kids just for the fuck of it. We don't need to expand our tribe. In fact, we need to make it smaller probably. So there are other priorities that I think are more important to take into account than what's the best way to raise a child, or well, that's not necessarily true, but what's the most efficient way to raise a child is what I should say. Because there are plenty of ways to raise a child, and I think that I don't know. I don't want to get into the details of that. The point I'm trying to make is about the gender norms and how if we could just do away with that, how many more people would be satisfied because what matters is that your kids are fed and that they're happy and that they get to see both of their parents, and it doesn't matter who stays home. And it shouldn't matter because it really are the consequences. If you really think that there is a consequence to not having the mother there, that's your choice. And I hope that your wife and your baby mother, whoever this person you're having children with, agrees with you. But I do think that if we could abandon these useless relics of the past, which may not be useless. I like Jordan Peterson's kind of outlook on these traditions. Is that there is a reason for them. We came up there was a evolutionarily advantageous reason for adopting these traditions most of the time. Maybe there wasn't an evolutionary reason, but most of the time they're there for a reason, and they are helpful. But we do have to understand their context, because what are they? They're just the ways that we've been doing them forever, and just because you've been doing something that way forever doesn't mean it's the best way. And there are a lot of people who have an issue with change. It doesn't even come into politics. Like I run into butchers who don't want to change what they want to do. The kind of animals they let through. You can find the conservatives in just about any group of people, and I think it's disappointing. Because there are a lot of things that we need to move on from. But then again, there are other traditions that maybe we should hold on to. I'm trying to think of a certain tradition, but I think you know what I mean. If you don't, that's fine. So anyway, guys, I don't want to add too much here, but I thought I would throw that out. I think, well, who knows? I was going to say maybe I'll try to do a show that kind of explains how I feel more personally about these issues, but I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be useful. We'll see, friends. But yeah, anyway, if you have any questions or concerns, if you don't like what MK said, go ahead and hop in the Yakkin with Nick feedback group and let me know, or send me an email. You can also go to MK Lords' links and stuff, and I'll throw those up on the show notes. But yeah, I think that's all I have for you guys. And with that, I appreciate you listening, and I hope to get you some stuff soon. I will be recording a Patreon-only podcast tonight, and it'll be up tonight. So watch for that.